Welcome to our audience. If you're just joining us, we are waiting for a few minutes while the participants join in. We had about 300 RSVPs and we have about 100 participants in our webinar so far. So we're just going to wait a couple minutes for those of you just joining us. Welcome everyone. If you're just coming into our webinar, this is the PUSD Black Mountain Ranch Southern Site Community FAQ meeting. We still have people joining us slowly but surely, so we're just going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started. Okay, we're up to about 125 participants and we are at 5:33. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Peck. I'm your moderator for tonight. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the Poway Unified School District, and you are joining the Poway Unified School District Black Mountain Ranch Southern Site Community FAQ meeting. We're going to actually start with some introductions, and for that, I'll actually stop screen sharing so you can see everyone at the same time. So as I mentioned, I'm Christine Peck. I'm your moderator for tonight. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Poway Unified School District, and we'll go with other PUSD staff. Rhea?
Hi, I'm Rhea Alschbach, the Assistant Director of Planning.
Ron?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ron Little. I'm the Associate Superintendent of Business Support Services for the district. Thanks for joining us.
And then we have our CFD expert with us, Adam Bauer.
Hi, my name is Adam Bauer. I serve as Municipal Advisor to the school district on their CFDs.
And we have demographics, Larry.
Hi there, I'm Larry Furcha. I'm with Cooperative Strategies, and we assist the school district with their enrollment projections.
Thank you. And with for property management, we'll start with Andreas.
Hi, I'm Andreas Schaltis. I'm with Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Rude, and Romo, one of the attorneys working with the district, and I handle property-related matters.
And last but not least, Barry.
Hi, I'm Barry Blade. I work as a real property consultant for a variety of school districts. Good evening.
Thank you, everyone. And so this will be your panel tonight, and we will be fielding questions. And I wanted to go over the format for tonight. So here are the norms and expectations of tonight's meeting. So this is a Zoom webinar in order to accommodate as many people as possible. And we have disabled the chat to avoid distractions, to allow everyone to focus on the questions as well as the panelists' answers. Just keep in mind that we as staff cannot speak on behalf of the board members or their decisions. So today's meeting is really for staff to answer all of your FAQs around the work and the process. We will start with some frequently asked questions informed by your RSVPs that you submitted. And then after each of those sections, we'll pause for about 5 minutes to see if you have a question related to that section. We'll ask that you raise your hand. You should all have a raised hand feature in your Zoom window. And at that time, when it's your turn, you'll be unmuted to speak and ask your question. And then finally, any unanswered questions can be asked at the end of the meeting. We just ask that everyone be respectful and professional. This meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded for future reference. So I spoke about the frequently asked questions that you submitted, and out of those questions, these were some of the top questions that were submitted in common. And so we wanted to see what you were wondering about. And by listing these up front, you know what to expect so that when you want to ask further questions or follow-up questions, you know where we're going here. So the first question we'll be addressing is, why is the school district doing this? Why are they trying to monetize its surplus property in the first place? Next, we got a lot of questions about all the Mello Roos taxes we pay and what happens to that. Another question that was frequently asked is, why has there been no additional middle school planned? And also, what about all the middle school age students in the Willow Grove area? Another popular question that was asked frequently is about process. So did the school district conduct the proper steps to declare this property surplus? Another question was, what were the proposals PUSD received for the surplus site, and what constitutes the most beneficial offer? And finally, what happens next? Will the community have a voice? Will any proposed projects go to a vote, et cetera? And so we'll start with those. And again, we will be giving folks an opportunity to ask questions at the end of each section and again at the end of the meeting. So let's begin. So the first question is, why is the school district trying to monetize its surplus property? So I'll refer this question first off to Mr. Ron Little, our Associate Superintendent of Business. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Peck. The short answer to the question is the district's exploring opportunities to leverage our finite assets to the benefit of our students and our community. So I'm sure, as the audience is aware, school districts generally have very limited assets. So property, and specifically in this case, surplus property, represents a tangible asset. So we view our current effort related to the Black Mountain Ranch Southern site as a fiscally responsible effort to create an ongoing revenue stream that can benefit the district's general fund. And the next couple slides we'll try to paint the picture of why that's necessary. So this slide is pretty indicative of what Poway Unified, I think, uniquely faces, not only in the county of San Diego, but also within the state. So part of the need arises in large part due to this new funding model, which really is not that new anymore. It was implemented in 2013. But the way that the state funds school districts, it allocates its funding based on certain student groups. And without going into too much detail, unless there's interest expressed later, it results in some inequities in the funding model. And Poway Unified, as you can see, as a result of this funding model by the state, is the lowest funded unified school district in the county. So you can see here, LCFF simply means the local control funding formula. That's the new formula that replaced the revenue limit formula that was in effect for decades prior to this model. Under this model, we receive about $9,115 per student, generally based on their attendance, And you can see the comparisons of other unified school districts in the county. The highest funded school district being San Diego Unified, given their unique student population, and they're getting about 10,600 plus per student. So they're receiving about 16.5% more funding from the state per student than Poway. So obviously we're charged, we think we do a good job, but we're charged with educating our students and supporting our teachers and our staff with fewer dollars in any given fiscal year. Next slide, please. The challenge, of course, has become that with those sort of low funding rates and the fact that the state has given us very little cost of living adjustments over the years and is not projected to give us any COLAs or cost of living adjustments for the next few years, we're anticipating some general fund deficits this year and for the next 3 years. So this chart represents sort of the past 8 years. This is our general fund. It's our main operating fund of the district. And you can see 8 years in review of our net activity. Net activity is simply the difference between our annual revenues that we take in versus our annual expenditures that go out. And the green bars on the chart represent years where our revenues exceeded our expenditures, and the red bars on the chart are years in which our expenditures exceeded our revenues. I like to call this, I used to call this slide the roller coaster slide of school district funding, because it was always sort of an up and down reality that we were dealing with from the state funding. Some good years and some bad years, depending on what the state economy looked like in any particular fiscal year. You can see in the current year, we're currently in 2021, we're projecting a deficit. A lot of that, without getting again into the weeds, is carryover that we didn't spend last year. So that accounts for probably half of that deficit. But more importantly, the out years, the next 2 years, we're also anticipating spending more than we're taking in. So we have two choices, right? We can increase revenues or we can decrease expenditures. And the most prudent approach, of course, is to try to do both of those things. Currently, we're spending about 85% of our general fund on staff and staff salaries, our teachers, our custodians, our administrators, our principals, all of our staff that go to educate students directly and support all the work that our educators do comprises about 85% of our general fund. Most districts in the county spend anywhere from 88 to 94% of their general fund budget on staff and benefits. So we feel that, you know, we're pretty lean with respect to our staffing costs. Notwithstanding, we do anticipate bringing a recommendation to the board next week with respect to some budget adjustments around reducing expenditures. But the current effort related to Black Mountain Ranch is really about how do we produce an ongoing revenue stream that generates X number of dollars every year that can help supplement our annual revenues that we receive from the state and the federal government particularly. So one of the reasons that we're looking at this particular revenue generating model is that we don't have a lot of options with respect to revenue, right? Our revenue is tied to our enrollment from the state level. Our revenue is tied to sort of our underrepresented pupils, like our English language learners at the federal level. And we have a small sliver of what we call local revenue. That's really sort of like donations from our foundation and all of you. Thank you for your support, as well as the fees that we charge for like facilities rentals, et cetera, bus passes. That's a very small part of our revenues. So the only real option in terms of generating substantial revenues for the general fund would be a parcel tax. Parcel tax should be, first of all, distinguished from a general obligation bond. that we floated, as you know, in March of this year. General obligation bonds are for facilities, and they do not benefit the general fund. Parcel taxes are really about programs and people. So parcel taxes, when levied and approved by the voters, would be a flat tax levied on every parcel of land in the district. It doesn't matter the size of the parcel, whether you're sitting on a half-acre property or a 2-acre property or your business. Every parcel would be taxed at the same amount. So, and that manner is sort of inequitable with respect to the assessed value of the parcel versus what you're paying in a flat tax, parcel tax scenario. What we know is that in San Diego County, we haven't seen any parcel tax measures been approved by voters in the last 2 decades. Part of that is because it requires a supermajority or 2/3 of the vote to be approved. The other thing to keep in mind, parcel tax typically have some sunshine clause, so it could be a 5-year parcel tax, it could be a 7-year parcel tax. I only know of 1 school district in the state, there may be more, that have a sort of an ongoing in perpetua parcel tax, and those are in the Bay Area up near San Francisco. There are some exemptions that are permitted. Typically seniors are exempted. And again, as I mentioned, parcel tax proceeds would support programs and people, and those revenues that would be generated from this parcel tax would go directly into the general fund and benefit the district's general fund for the foreseeable future. So that's kind of where we are with our creative solutions on the revenue side of the equation. So we're certainly open to exploring other options and other creative solutions, and look forward to hearing from you about some of those ideas.
Thank you, Ron. So for those of you who joined a little late, the format of tonight is we are first addressing some of the most frequently asked questions as submitted by you through the RSVPs, and they've been broken up into sections. So after each section, we'll pause for a few minutes to see if anyone has specific questions related to this section. So if anyone has any questions for Ron related to the school district's budget or general fund or revenues, go ahead and raise your hand and we will unmute you and have you speak. Everyone should have a raised hand feature in their Zoom window. Okay. Pardon? Okay. The first attendee will be Jürgen Stark.
Good evening, Jürgen.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay. So I think you guys have something about Mello coming up. Otherwise, would like to know how Mello factors into all of this.
Yes, definitely.
My question on, Ron, you said specifically that the school is looking for a set of revenues over time. Obviously, money over time is worth much less than money up front. So why is it that it has to be over time versus getting an upfront payment if the land is to be sold?
No, that's a good question. We will tackle the Mello question, I think, in the next segment, actually. But the Mello tax sort of short answer is it cannot be used for general fund purposes. So Mello dollars, as Adam will explain next, have specific purposes set by statute, and they cannot be used to fund the general operations of a school district. With respect to your second question, the difference between selling an asset once is that you get those revenues once and they're one time, right? So you could use those surpluses to solve a one-time gap or maybe a multi-year gap over a short window of time. But a better strategy, we feel, is to create a revenue stream that continues to give year after year. So it's a revenue surplus that we can count on as we develop each year's budget, right? So if we only had one-time money, it would solve the structural deficit. It would solve the district's deficit in that 1 year that we received the revenues. But the following year, we'd be back to a structural deficit, right? Because we would have no additional revenues coming in those subsequent years.
But if the one-time payment, for example, from a sale, 5% of it gets used for the first year, what happens to the other 95%, particularly if the value of that dollar amount is higher than the value of the payments over time?
Yeah, good question. So two things. One is the state is pretty specific about how the proceeds of a sale of a property can be used. So if we were to sell a property, a surplus property, those proceeds would have to be used for capital improvement projects. So we would not have the benefit of utilizing those dollars, to be honest, to support people and programs within the general fund. So we call those restricted funds. So any proceeds from the sale of surplus property are restricted for specific purposes, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. And that was one of the factors that we considered when evaluating the three proposals that we received for the surplus property. Is it better to have one-time money and spend it on capital needs, of which we have many, or is it better to have an ongoing revenue stream that can service the general fund structure, deficit structure, over time?
Thanks, Ron. The next question is from Tara Anderson. Tara, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hello, Tara.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. We'll go to Todd Tita. Todd, go ahead with your question. Oh, we lost Todd.
Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll just go down the line then. Scott's Galaxy S9. Scott, go ahead with your question.
Hi,
Can
Scott.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Little, it's a question similar to the one you're going to ask. So, as you looked at these options for the land, did you perform any kind of standard valuation comparison, like net present value of the different options?
We did, and actually we're going to address those in a later segment as well. So again, as I mentioned, that was part of our most beneficial analysis as we reviewed the three different offers. So I think that Mr. Chialtis will go into a little bit of detail about the economics related to each of those proposals.
And so, question is, why are you consulting on this now rather than before? Like, why not have been more transparent about this so that you could compare, the public could compare the various options?
Well, I think I would argue that we've been pretty transparent. So we've had at least 3 public meetings with the Board of Education. When we presented our evaluation of the most beneficial proposal, we included our staff and consultant comments about the criteria we used in evaluating which offer was the most beneficial. And we talked about the economics related to those 3 various offers.
Okay, so next is Vivian Carpenter. Vivian, go ahead.
Hi, Vivian.
You there, Vivian? All right, we'll move on to Gail Schnorr. Gail, what's your question? Oh, there's Vivian.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know how to unmute.
No worries, go ahead.
You started off saying that there was a projected deficit in the general fund for the next 3 years, but the reality is that there is a district-wide deficit. Isn't that true, that we have a district-wide deficit?
Our general fund is our.
No, I'm not asking. I'm asking about the entire district. I'm not limiting it to just the general fund.
Well, we have 20 funds about. The only one that really has been running a deficit is the general fund. So our other funds are either have good fund balances and typically do not run deficits. You are correct. In this current year, given the COVID pandemic, we probably will run a deficit in our food and nutrition fund, just given the level of, of revenues that we're not receiving for lunches that we serve. And we'll probably run a deficit in our child care fund this year. So that's a good point. So the general fund then is left to subsidize, to the extent necessary, the deficits in those other funds as well. I hope that answered your question, Vivian.
We have one more, we have time for one more question before we move on to the next section, for Gail Schnorr.
Hi, Gail.
Hi. A couple of observations. Number one, I think it's a little misleading showing the revenues from the state for Poway Unified compared to San Diego Unified and Vista and underperforming districts. The way the state funding for general funds works is to help Title I schools and schools that are have underperforming populations. So the fact that Poway receives less funds, a little less than $1,000, it's not that significant. But I also think that to burden the Black Mountain area with the traffic, and we are going to take on the burden of the whole district so that you can have revenues for the whole district. I think that the parcel tax option would spread the burden across the entire district. Every homeowner, every business, everyone would then be contributing to the revenues that are needed, where this is plopping a Costco right in our backyard, where we have to endure the traffic, the pollution. It's dangerous for kids, crime, it's unsightly. It would also be the third Costco in Poway Unified School District. Why is Poway Unified School District the Costco champion for the entire county? We would have 3 in our district, more than any other district. San Diego Unified doesn't even have 3, and their area is twice as big. I also don't think that you've been very transparent. You may have brought them up at school board meetings, but the general population doesn't really follow the agenda of the Poway Unified School District. Now that this is presented to us and it's going to be across the street from us and spoil our view, now we have to, oh, yeah, we've had 3 meetings about it. I think that you haven't been transparent. I also think that the land should be used for a school, what it was gifted to Poway Unified for. I think it's an opportunity for Poway Unified to create a high-tech middle school, create a middle school that maybe offers language or arts or some type of a specialized middle school that could draw more attendees from neighboring, nearby homes. And a Costco is not the answer for a school district.
Thank you. I appreciate those observations. I'm just going to comment on a couple of them. One is, it's true that the funding model is geared towards assisting districts better serve those underrepresented student populations. How effectively districts do that with the additional funding is another matter. I would argue that it is not an insignificant amount of money. So $1,000 a year times 36,000 students is $36 million more each year that Poway Unified would have to work with and think of the programs that the educational programs we could create with that kind of money. I do agree with your assertion that a parcel tax is a nice approach to having the entire Poway Unified community support the work that we do. And I've spoken to the challenges already of passing a parcel tax. Not that it can't be done, it would just require an inordinate amount of community support as well as advocacy and effort. And we could certainly tackle that if we put our minds to it, I'm sure. The last comment I'll make is we're going to review a little bit later why another middle school probably isn't the best approach. And I think the data that we'll share with you at that time will bring some light to that comment.
Thanks, Ron. That concludes our section on school budget and finance. Just a reminder for those of you who joined late, the format is that we're tackling some of the top questions that you submitted as FAQs, including Mello-Roos question, why is there no middle school planned? What are the proper steps to declare a property surplus? What were the proposals received? Why is this the most beneficial offer, et cetera? So just so you know that those topics are still coming up. The next question we received is about Mello-Roos. And the question is, what about all the Mello-Roos taxes we pay? Where do they go? What are they used for?
Great, thank you. In the next section, we start to try to address that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The use of Mello-Roos taxes, what these are set up to do is they finance acquisition, facilities, rehabilitation of assets that have a 5-year or more useful life. I'll get into some of the steps involved, but typically what will happen is a Mello-Roos or a community facilities district will be established. And then as the development takes place, that CFD, Community Facilities District, will issue bonds, and those property owners within that Community Facilities District will repay those bonds. But then those bonds, what they do is they fund the facilities that are needed for the region there. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Kind of give an overview, but get into some of the details of how this would typically work. Is typically a landowner will file a petition with a school district or another public agency and request that that school district form a community facilities district on their property. And the reason why they do this is they have a school fee obligation that they need to pay prior to getting a building permit issued by the city or county. So they have to show documentation that they've satisfied their school fee obligation. The district issues something called a certificate of compliance. And when the developer or landowner has that in hand, and then the developer pays their other fees, they can get a building permit issued for development. Most cases here, we're talking about residential development. And then now, once that is done, once a developer has requested that take place, the school district will work with a finance team, but in particular, a special tax consultant that prepares a special tax formula, otherwise known as rate and method of apportionment. This rate and method of apportionment dictates how the levy will take place within that community facilities district. And that levy is then what is used to repay the bonds. That kind of gets into that next bullet point, the third one there, the green arrow. So now there's been some development that's taken place in the project. We can identify what the revenue stream is and the facilities that will be needed to serve that community. And then bonds are issued. And so now that revenue stream is monetized. It's consumed and used towards repaying those bonds for the facilities that were provided. In some cases, there's a little bit of an extra amount that can go for pay-as-you-go facilities, but on a per CFD basis, it's a pretty minor amount. Now, as I've told you, that at the very beginning of this, the landowner who owns all the land, so typically we have a unanimous vote for this, has requested and petitioned the district to do this, but now they have to disclose to the property owners before the property owner, future property owners like residents or other builders, whoever's going to buy that property, they must disclose the maximum tax to those future buyers to make sure they're fully aware that there's the special taxes on the property. So I think that concludes the slides that I've prepared. Ray, I think is next.
Ron, did you want to start this one, or you want
Oh,
me to
sure.
do it?
So yeah, so this is to sort of further answer the question of, what did we do with all those Melrose taxes? Or to Adam's point, what did we do with the bond proceeds, right, that we levied to support the infrastructure as well as the community needs that were identified at that point. So this is just a list of how those proceeds were expended. So we purchased the Willow Grove Elementary School site outright with those funds. Those funds also partially funded the construction of Del Norte High School, Willow Grove Elementary School, and Design 39, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And those funds also added some additional student seats at the school districts, at the schools that we list here below. Next slide.
I think that's the last one.
Okay, so at this time, if you have any additional questions related to CFDs or Mello-Roos taxes, go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you for your question. Okay, we have John Barfield. Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for calling on me for this particular part of the meeting. It might be slightly off, but I think it's germane. My question is, Costco is simply a dynamic development engine. They are the 4th largest retailer in the world and the 2nd largest retailer in the United States. They have been studied by Harvard Business School and other top business schools for the power of their development engine, one of which is to forecast population density in a given area. And when they believe that the population density arrives at the point of the need for a new big box store, if you will, they typically approach landowners who own property that would be appropriate to accommodate a large Costco development and serve the population in that area. My question is simply, going back over the last decade or so, when was the first contact between either Costco directly or representatives of Costco to the Poway Unified School District? I'd like to know, when the very first contact was made, likely not with the current members of the school board or the staff, but likely long ago in accordance with their development planning. I know that there was a land study done approximately a dozen years ago. But again, the specific question is, when was the very first connection made between Poway Unified School District and or its representative and Costco directly and or its representative?
I think that contact, well, I know for a fact that contact certainly precedes my time with the school district. By how many years, I would have to go back and check, but certainly when I started 3.5 years ago, there was already interest being expressed by Costco at that time.
We can look into if we can find that date for you, Mr. Barfield. Next is Tara Anderson. Go ahead, Tara.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Last time it wasn't working. Sorry about that. So I had heard there were talks of retiring the CFD funds. I guess I just want to, is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've, staff has worked quite diligently, I would say, over the last 18 months with the help of Mr. Bauer and Mr. Alsbach to develop a plan, which we've shared with the board, to retire CFDs earlier than anticipated.
Got it.
And so we're doing that with some funding and some that sort of delta that Adam discussed a little bit, the pay-as-you-go and some other funds to help. And I think there's a, it's on our website, right, Rhea?
Yes, it's on the CFD webpage, the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so the plan is out there, and we actually list by CFD how many years in advance this plan would retire those CFDs, and those taxes would be eliminated at some point.
Okay, the reason I ask is, given the unlikelihood that Prop 15 will pass, which I know the school district was expecting, hopefully some relief there for the general fund.
Yes.
And that combined with board member Patel mentioning at one of the virtual town halls prior to the elections, she had mentioned that a future bond was highly likely for the Poway School District. But does that mean that if and when a new bond measure is issued, all the residents will then be taxed at the higher market value on their properties versus the old bonds?
Adam, go ahead, please.
So when a general obligation bond is, if it's approved by the board and then also by the community and then put on the tax roll, it's based on a property's assessed value. That assessed value would not be different between two different general obligation bonds. So if that home turned over meaning sold, then it could have a higher assessed value based on that new home sale, but the assessed value would be consistent across both general obligation bond measures.
Next question is from Gloria Beck. Gloria, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. A couple questions about Mello Roos. So I've been here in the community since 2003, and I understand that all of the funds got to fund a lot of the different schools that have been built since then. But going forward, if this is not being used for a new school facility in our area, where will it go to? And a little bit, so what happens to that, right? Where will it be used? And on the RFP, it sounds like that you were already in preference of a leasing agreement versus a purchase. So when the RFP went out, was there an indication that you were welcoming a leasing agreement? And were there enough opportunities across the community and the wider market to bid on such leasing agreement? Because it sounds very much to me that it was already tipped in the favor of something like Costco, right? So I'm just curious.
Sure, those are good questions. I'll take the first one, and maybe Andreas can answer the second one about the RFP. But with respect to the use of the Mello Roos dollars, so it's an excellent question. As Adam explained, remember those Melrose, the special taxes that you're paying as a homeowner are simply an instrument to repay bonds that have already been issued and money that's already been spent. So it's not like we even have the latitude to use those dollars other than the pay-as-you-go piece that Adam mentioned, which is very minimal, on current or future facilities needs, which is why the district floated the general obligation bond, Measure P, that we did in March, because to your point, we realized, and we've known for some time, of course, that we have significant facilities needs and we have no capital resources identified, given the state funding model, to address those needs in the future. So with respect to the sale lease, I forget the third option, but Andreas is going to fill us in on the RFP and how we structured that and what we requested.
Yes, thank you, Ron. So yes, with respect to the RFP, no, it was not tipped in favor of lease per se or any particular method. What we had discussed with the board And this would go back to the end of 2019. I think it was August of 2019, open session board meeting, PowerPoint presentation that I gave. I explained and even gave some examples of what other school districts had done recently with regard to sale, lease, and exchange, and basically going out through an RFP process, assuming we got a State Board of Ed waiver, which we did. We follow a surplus property alternative, which what we call this RFP process versus a bid hearing where you have to take the highest bid. Instead, we said, hey, we're interested in sale, exchange, or lease. We provided that RFP and saw what comes back. To give you some context, the district I worked that same sort of process with previously was thinking potentially lease, ended up receiving 1 development type lease, 2 for leasing as is, the buildings that were already on a property, and 24 sale. Nobody saw that coming, and they ended up selling. Here we received essentially a mix, one that was either to acquire through sale or exchange, another to buy it outright, so a sale, and then this lease option. I think staff and many school districts staff look at lease as a potential really good option because what we talked about earlier today, which is making sure that you have revenue that isn't necessarily earmarked for just one thing. If we were to sell it outright, for example, you would have to use those proceeds for capital improvements or maintenance that won't reoccur in a 5-year period, but not for other purposes, so it's restricted. So while staff might have been starting to think that ground lease options might be a good option, nobody had foreclosed any other option, and I very much saw this as a potential for sale or exchange. Dr. Blade and I, who you'll hear from later, have done exchanges in the past, and I thought this property could maybe go that way.
Thank you, Andreas. I know Mello Roos is a hot topic, so we'll take one more question from Jennifer Greenhall before moving on. Jennifer?
Hi, I think you answered some of my questions, but I was just wondering, wasn't the administration building construction also part of our Mello Roos? Didn't that come out of our Mello Roos as well?
I think Rhea can probably speak to that.
So the Mello Roos agreements do allow us to purchase and build administration that support the students in this district. The district office here was from surplus special taxes. So it was not your direct Mello Roos. It was all the Mello Roos districts that have improvement areas. If you live in a CFD that has an improvement area, then your surplus special taxes is what was agreed upon with those developers at that time, were used, and it was a lease revenue bond to help purchase and fix up or do the tenant improvements on this building. And that is allowable based on the definition of what school facilities are for each CFD.
Okay. And how do you retire a CFD? It seems strange to me because it sounds like you still have money there that could be used to say, you know, help renovate Mount Carmel or other schools. I don't really understand the whole process.
Well, that's a good question. So how you retire a CFD is you simply pay off all the bonds and the outstanding debt. With respect to any leftover balances, if there is any, it would be minimal. And obviously we would target those funds to be used on facilities in those CFD areas. Adam, do you want to add anything to that?
I do.
Oh,
I think it's important to note that we cannot use CFD funds to modernize schools. CFDs are meant for expansion because of new students and development. So we can't fix schools with CFD funds.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rhea. We're going to move on to the next question, which I know a lot of people attending are wondering. Why has there been no additional middle school planned at that site or just period? And I think Rhea, you can speak to that.
I will. So we can go to the next slide. I won't talk about every topic here, but I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to go through the why, how we get there in regards to a middle school. The short answer really quick is the demographics don't support the need for a middle school. We're going to kind of walk you through, myself and Larry will talk about the demographics, how we do enrollment projections, and then a quick look at capacity, not to hold your time up for too long. But just so you understand what it is we're tracking, we have, our district is 99 square miles and we have 39 different Mello Roos districts. One of the things that Adam mentioned in the beginning is when that landowner comes to the district and requests a CFD be formed, the rate and method of apportionment is prepared. And part of that is understanding what that development is going to look like and how many units we can expect. So we have that information from formation of the CFD. So we begin tracking it from that point. We use this information in a lot of different ways. One of the things, an important aspect of the planning department, is to work to find funding to support the needs of the district facilities wise. So tracking the development, projecting enrollment and dealing with the capacity is very important for us, because we want to make sure that we have those facilities available for the students when they show up. Next slide, please. So just to give you a small example of another piece of the puzzle that we use, these are our boundary maps. So Larry, before I came, because I've been here since 2004 doing this work, worked with the district in preparing what we now call grid codes, but are essentially student attendance area zones for each specific area and within each boundary for each elementary school. So we are elementary school, middle school, and high school. So we are tracking students within those areas to that extent, to make sure our boundaries make sense, to make sure the capacity at the school makes sense, and to understand how the students are moving in and out of the community. So before we move on, I just want to give Larry opportunity to just briefly go over the type of enrollment projections that we do, what those enrollment and projections entail, and what kind of factors he uses based on his history in the district, and what are those factors in projecting our enrollment for us.
Great. Well, thanks, Ray. It's amazing how fast 17 years can go projecting enrollment for the school district. What you see here, again, are the 200 plus grids or student attendance area zones. And what we do is the student information system that the district has identifies what grid every student lives within and what school they attend. So that's the baseline information that we use. We understand where kids go to school and where they reside within the school district. Within that information, then we also add information on births within the school district. So we're gathering information through the California Department of Public Health and the California Department of Finance that look at historic and projected birth trends within the zip codes that are served by the school district, as well as the County of San Diego, to identify, 5 years out, how many kindergartners are we likely to expect and what those trends look like within the communities served by the school district. Importantly, and as Ray has mentioned, we have a long history of looking at the residential development that's within the school district. So each of those residential development projects is assigned to a grid. And those grids were designed to cut around the different CFDs and the different residential areas so that we know how many units are expected to be built within each of those study area grids in each of the years going forward. And that's information that Rhea and other folks at the Poway district, they contact the developers on a quarterly basis to get updated information on how many units are expected, when they're expected to be built and occupied. And there's a tracking sheet of them going through looking at city council minutes, planning commission minutes to understand what projects are out there and what the planning horizon looks like for them. So we look at when the residential developments are expected to occur, and then we look at how many students on average are we expected to see out of those homes. And what we've done is we've looked historically on average to see about how many students come out of a new home when it's generated. And so we multiply the number of homes by the student generation rate to get an estimate of how many new students will be generated into the district. And we add that on top of the existing student enrollment as we matriculate those students forward. The other thing that we do is we apply factors to see on average how many kindergartners become first graders become second graders, because there's historical averages that we see of either growth or decline from year to year. The other thing that we've seen on the west side, specifically in the district, is there's been, when the development is new, we see a pretty ratcheting up of number of students coming from that community. It reaches a peak and then it starts to tail off. So we've seen that cycle a number of times on the west side of the district over the last 20 years as development occurs, attracts families with young children. Those students age through the system. And then folks tend to stay in their homes because they like them a lot and they've come to enjoy them. And so they stay and there aren't new students to follow them. So that's one of the trends that we've seen. There's kind of a peak enrollment that the area has hit, and then it starts to come down. And so we've seen that cycle numerous times in the different communities as they've been built. So I'll turn it back over to Rhea.
Okay, so before we switch slides, before we get to this one, Christine, I just want to cover our capacity, how we do capacity, what that looks like, and what that entails. So once we have our demographics and Larry puts together the enrollment projections, then what I start to do is I work off of the information that I get from the schools, which we call site utilization, which helps us define how the campuses are being used. So I may know that Black Mountain has 80 classrooms, but based on their enrollment and their programs, they may use 70 of those classrooms. So we look at that and we determine what classes are we going to count as far as capacity and what are we not, because we know they're very specific. So we design the capacity based off of that information and determine based on enrollment projections, based on whatever the student, whatever the teacher union's average number of students in a classroom is, what we consider our other possibilities of enrollment, then we look at that and we determine the capacity. So we can go on to the next slide. So now I want to just talk about, the history of this site and why we haven't built a middle school. So if we go back, because I got to be here during that time, prior to forming the Real Property Advisory Committee and working through the surplus property process, one of the things we always did in planning is work with the district as far as our long-term projections and what we saw. So as Larry said, understanding what the developments were doing, knowing when the CFDs were going to start occupying the homes, we would do annual big meetings to really say what we expected. So in 2011, we realized that there was a need at the elementary schools more on the Forest Ranch and Del Sur side. There was a small need for middle schools. So we tried to figure out what was the most cost effective, what was the best way to deal with that situation. And that situation was dealt with by building Design 39, because what Design 39 could do is help deal with the K through 5 need and also provide some seats at the middle school level, because as I mentioned, the projections didn't show a need for a full middle school. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to get into some numbers because that's just the way my brain works, to give you some idea. So I try to make it as less cumbersome as possible, but just to give you a very briefly, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but if we go back to 2012 and where we started and with the 7-11 committee and determining first surplus, you can see under the projected enrollment is the last of the 7-year projection. What we projected based on what we had in the school district, what that capacity looked like. So if we had a current of 7,900 students in the school district, we projected, just looking at the enrollment and looking at how the homes were built over historic, the assumption or the projection was we would need enough spaces for 9,000 students. And if you look at our capacity, just in the 27-to-1 ratio, we had enough capacity for 9,200 students. And you can see how that increases. So the capacity was there, so we didn't need a middle school at that time. Now, if we fast forward to when we requested a waiver the second time around for the RFP and what was presented to the Real Property Advisory Committee, you can see sort of the same thing. Now, I'm sorry, because on my screen, I see everyone's face and I can't see my numbers. So forgive me for looking down, but you can see sort of the same situation. Our enrollment at the time is 8536. Our 7th year projection shows us going down to 8478. But if you look at the projections, we still have enough seats for 9,000 students. So again, the need still isn't there for a middle school. Now we can go to the next slide. So some of you, I think, have seen, because I've spoken to some of you, our long-range facility master plan that we have on our website, where we did the same thing. We looked at where we were in our enrollments for 1920. We looked at the 7th year projection, and you can see we show a little bit of a growth based on this current teacher contract. You can see that we have capacity for 9,500 students. Well, we only have 8478 and we only project 8767. So we have adequate space for students in the middle school. So again, the need for another middle school is not supported by the enrollment or the projections. And I think that's my last slide. I think you're on mute, Christine.
Thanks, Rhea. And so we'd like to pause and see if there's any questions for Rhea or Larry related to the need for a middle school. If you could raise your hand, we'll start calling on you. All right. We've got PW. Go ahead, PW.
Hi, my question is, all these metrics are backward looking rather than forward looking. And isn't this self-fulfilling? So if you put a Costco in, no one will want to move into the neighborhood with kids. So therefore you will not need additional middle school space.
Do you want to answer that, Larry? I'm not sure I really understood the question.
I mean, I don't know that we can necessarily speculate on what the the development would do. And I apologize, I have a feisty dog in the background. But I think what we're looking at is past trends to predict future enrollment, which is the standard approach to projecting student enrollment growth or decline within school districts, is looking at historical trends as well as future expectations, and using the science and art of enrollment projections to estimate what we're likely to see going forward.
And I guess that's my point, is you're backward looking rather than being forward looking, and you're not using any forward looking metrics, which could suggest growth, particularly with the pandemic and people working from home. So I don't think it's sufficient to be using backward looking metrics.
Well, and I guess I would, add to that. I mean, we are using forward looking metrics as well. We're looking at the number of homes that are expected to be built. We're looking at future birth trends to see how many kids our families are having. And, as a whole, birth trends across the state have been declining. People are having fewer kids. People are waiting till later in life to have kids. I mean, those are some of the trends that we are actively seeing now, as well. So I think that is factored in.
Our next question is Jennifer Greenhall. Hi, Jen.
Hi. So did you really factor in, there's about, I calculated around 3,084 new units that are family units that are going to be coming up in the next 3 to 5 years. And I did the same calculations, and I can understand that there is, with as the students in the district and the families age, that you are getting some drop off. But I would think that with those 3,084 new units, we would still have quite a bit of a bump. And also that we've only projected 7 years out, and the Costco lease is for 40 to 60 years. So there's really no very long-term projection there. And so I'm just not really convinced. First of all, I don't think we would probably need a middle school, but I think we're absolutely going to need an elementary school across the district. So that's my question.
So I'll do the first part, Larry, and then I'll let you do the why we don't do 40 years out. So as I mentioned, I've been in this district doing this since 2004. When I started, we were tracking 9,000 plus units that were either under construction or future development. We have to report to the state on an annual basis in order to be provided state funding to help us build these schools. And we do that annually. And part of that work is what projects are approved projects that the state will accept versus projects that are in the future. Sometimes some of the projects that we're still tracking have been on our list since I started, because those projects take a while. One of those projects is in Rhodes Crossing. That gentleman has been trying to get his project done all this time, and it's going to come up now, but it's always stayed within our projections. Today, we are basing our projections on 3,400 units. So we do have that. And I do believe you and I spoke, and you provided me a copy of your spreadsheet, and you had nothing on your spreadsheet that I wasn't already tracking. So like I said, it's very important for us to be sure that we have the facilities available for our students. So we do see sometimes that we have a lot of elementary school students, and we have to figure out what that space looks like. But we're not at a point where we feel we need new schools. Our community is built, I don't want to say building out, but in the sense of the CFDs, we already know what those projects look like. The only thing that is going to be a factor is simply infill, and infill isn't thousands of units. And we also still know about those because, like we mentioned earlier, we track them, we pay attention. We do developer fee reports where those consultants also reach out to the counties and our local jurisdictions to see what projects they show coming up in the next 5 years. It would be I don't know, and I'll let Larry talk to it. I think it would be difficult to project out 40 years when you don't have 40 years worth of development to support those projections or use in the factor. So Larry, I'll let you, if you want to add something to that.
Sure. No, I think, what we see in communities is we see, and this is across the district, this is across the state, that there is those, and I mentioned earlier, there's those periods when homes are first built where we see that peak enrollment that you get a couple years after the home is built. And then we see things start to settle down. And the example I would give, or two probably examples in Poway, is if 17 years ago, if we were at a similar meeting and I would have told you Poway High School would be 2,000 students right now, and we wouldn't have changed the attendance boundary, you would have thought I was crazy. But that's what we were projecting, was going out to this point in time that eventually Poway High School would be about 2,000 students based on residents, because it was 3,000 plus at the time. So those are the trends that we're seeing. We're seeing kids aging and up into the district, fewer younger kids across the district. We're seeing places like Stone Ranch where they were bursting at the seams for a number of years, where we thought, how are they going to have more kindergartners? How can they still have more kindergartners this year than they had last year? We were saying that for a number of years, and then it trailed off. All the homes are still there. People are still in those homes, but there's just not as many kids that get generated from those homes after that initial period of time. Now, we know that there's going to be fluctuations. We know that there's going to be peaks and valleys, but we also know there's a lot of capacity in the district schools, especially at the elementary school level, especially on the west side of the district. And Rhea can definitely speak to that more, but there are schools on the west side at the elementary level that have plenty of capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the costs of operating schools, especially smaller schools as well.
Yeah.
A question from Sabrina Leitner. Sabrina, you're up.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So one question I had is on your presentations where you were showing capacities. I noticed the capacity number was changing, and from one year to another, and I'm trying to understand why that number would change.
What do you mean? So let's go back. Can we go back to one of those slides?
Yeah. Sure. So if you take Mesa Verde, for example, from one, yeah, exactly. So if you look at Mesa Verde and you look at the capacity column with a specific ratio, 27:1, why does that change from, the first one to the second one?
So what we're factoring in this, so you mean why is the capacity different in each three of those columns?
Yes. Well, okay. No, not in the ratio, but I'm saying if you say compare apples to apples, so you look at Mesa Verde with 27:1 ratio.
Right.
Why is it different from one slide to the other?
Right. Okay. So when I was just speaking about how we determine capacity, so one of the things that we do, the district follows California Department of Education's, it's CBED's reporting day. It's their annual enrollment reporting day. At that time, I also work with each school site to ask for a site utilization report that will give me information on how they are using their classrooms. So from one year to the next, Mesa Verde, like I mentioned, could have, and I don't know off the top of my head how many classrooms they have, but let's say they have 60 classrooms total built, the school was built with 60 classrooms. Well, in 2010, they could have only been using 50% of those classrooms to do general education and special education. And those are the classrooms that I would count as capacity. I'm not gonna count their classroom they're using for a psychologist, their classroom they're using for a pull-out program, their classroom that they're using for, sometimes they have different programs that they use classrooms for. So we don't count that in the capacity. And then the next year, they may not need those programs and they may be using more classrooms, more of their classroom space. So that's why I wanted to try to convey the fact that it's something that we do on a regular basis because it is a fluctuating type of situation depending on how they need to use their classrooms. So there's always a surplus of classrooms at each site because they're not at a capacity where they need to use every single classroom. Now, Oak Valley is the exception, and we just added some classrooms there, but they were probably one of my only, and Bernardo Heights, that were using every single space on their campus. And so their enrollment, their capacity didn't fluctuate as much until we added more classrooms. So hopefully that helps, but I know it can get confusing, but that's the work that we do. We work with LSS to determine what are the spaces that we know if push came to shove, we wouldn't want to take away from that school if we needed for capacity. So we try to determine if the school just used that same number of classrooms, would they have enough space and still be able to offer those special programs to their students? Does that help answer your question?
Rhea, I want to move us forward because I know there's a lot more to get to.
Yeah, there is.
And the next question is actually also for you.
Oh, yeah.
So this is more specific to this area. So what about all the middle school age students in the Willow Grove area?
Okay. So really quick, we focus really on the Willow Grove boundary area because these are the same kids that we would assume if we ever built a middle school would flow into that middle school. So just to answer the question, what about all the middle school kids in Willow Grove? As you can see, this enrollment is based on the day, like I mentioned, CBEDS, where we do our enrollment pool for the state. There were 1,396 TK through 8 students in the Willow Grove area. And you can see there's only 493 that are attending our schools. 903 elementary students. And you can see in the second table exactly what schools they're going to. So 493 isn't an optimal size for a middle school. Middle school, you want to be able to offer as many of the same programs as you do at the other middle schools. So, and you couldn't do that with a smaller middle school. Most of our middle schools, as you saw, are over 1,000, between 1,000 to 1,400, a little over 1,400 students. So 493 would not make for a new middle school. And aside from that, you have to consider what are the funding options available to fund a middle school to be built, and the CFDs in the area that support Willow Grove or attend Willow Grove, the funding availability isn't there. Aside from that, because someone brought up our special reduction plan, that would take away from our ability to also move, it would take away how soon we wanted to look at trying to refund or retire some of the CFDs. Once we start adding in new projects, then that money has to be used for that. But again, the financing isn't available to build a new school, nor are the students available, the student need isn't there.
So on that note, we can take a few more questions. Tara, you're up. Tara Anderson.
Hi, Christine. This question's for Rhea.
Go ahead.
So Rhea, kind of going back to the slide that you had earlier with the enrollment projections, bear with me here.
Okay.
So your slide, I think it's the one before this. It was a few more, but it's related to the middle school question.
Okay.
The other one, the one right before this, I think. So here, so you projected future enrollment based on historical values, I presume.
Yes.
However, it's not so much the student numbers that I'd like to review closer, but I think, instead it's the assumptions that are driving your maximum capacity on each campus. So, as you know, California has a recommended number of students per certain acreage for the different school sites. Specifically for middle schools, it's 1,000 students per 25 acres. And Poway's policy is for 1,300 students per 27 acres. Now, if you do the math on those numbers and you divide the number of students by the number of acres, it looks like Poway is allowing for 48 students per acre, compared to California's recommended 40 students per acre. So based on that, it seems like Poway is planning for overcapacity, and perhaps this is why the projections are off with respect to the need for a new middle school. Because if you go back to this number, and this should actually be like for Bernardo Heights instead of 1,370 and Black Mountain 1,345, just for simplicity's sake, if you just make all of these numbers 1,000 students and you just add the hundreds number, that'll come up, that'll get you close to 1,900 students, which is basically a middle school.
Right. So I believe you and I have spoken about this before, but just to clarify, the information that you're referring to related to what CDE has in the acreage is very specific to designing a school. So if you're using those factors to go back to schools that are already designed, that's not what the function of that information is for CDE. What CDE wants to make sure is that when you build a school initially, that those are the standard factors or the minimums that they require. They don't tell us how many students we're allowed to have in our classrooms or how big our campuses are allowed to be. That information comes from what our teacher union contracts allow for and what the capacity is and what the educational specifications of the school districts are. So that's about as far as I can get into that comment, but that's pretty much what I factor it on. I also, when I do capacity, look at the states and I use their either 25-1 or 27-1, just out of curiosity to see, but it's not the factor that we use when we're trying to do projections. That is a factor that you use when you are designing a brand new school or you're building a school and you have to go through CDE's process to get approved to get your plans approved.
Thank you, Rhea.
You're welcome.
Moving on, the question is, did you conduct the proper steps to declare the property surplus? I know there's been a lot of questions about the process.
Hi, this is Andreas. Thank you. So yes, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. This goes back, and you've heard earlier today, prior conversation about the Real Property Advisory Committee that was formed back in 2012. They had to go through a enumerated process by statute that explains what their duties are, recommendations they may make with respect to property being surplus, specifically this particular property. They did declare it surplus, or at least make that recommendation. The board accepted that recommendation, declared it surplus back in 2012, and then sought a waiver and received a waiver, but then didn't do anything with it, didn't take action to lease or sell the property back in that time. So that waiver expires, only good for 2 years. That expired by 2016. And then in 2019, as I mentioned earlier, we went back to the board first in August and later in November and got the green light and approval to proceed with the RFP process. But before doing that, we wanted to make sure that we brought forward the advisory committee work. So the advisory committee met in 2019, discussed again, as you heard from Rhea a moment ago, projections and all the duties it needs to boxes it needs to check to make sure this property still should be recommended as surplus. And then actually also gave the green light to seek a waiver again. The waiver is beneficial with a property like this typically. This property has some extra hurdles for development. Many of you have heard about Prop A and things that we've talked about at prior board meetings and discussions. So it would have been very difficult without seeking a waiver to simply go forward with a bid hearing, open bids, have at that bid either for lease or for sale offers that we were then needing to compare to see which one was high, determine the highest bid, and either accept that highest bid or reject all of them. That's the traditional method. Very difficult. What the waiver allows us to do is receive proposals, go through those with a fine-tooth comb, make sure we know what we're reading, what a developer truly is offering, summarize all that and bring it forward to the school board for approval. As you know, we got received a waiver from the State Board of Ed in 2019 before sending out the RFP, and the State Board of Ed makes sure it checks all the boxes and knows for sure that the advisory committee did what it needed to do. They asked plenty of questions before making an approval to the State Board of Education, and that's CDE and their whole waiver office doing that. So all of that was put in place, and then the RFP proceeded. So that was that slide there. Questions?
So Andreas, if you don't mind, we're gonna save the remaining questions for this topic and the remaining ones till the end so we can get through the presentation, because I know folks are wanting to ask their questions. So let's get through. What were the proposals PUSD received for the surplus site, and what constitutes the most beneficial offer?
Very good.
Thank you.
Barry, did you want to start that one off?
Yeah, I'll start this first part. The district actually received 4 proposals in response to its RFP. 3 of those proposals were for a purchase of the property, and 1 was for a ground lease. Let me start with the Cambridge school, the one in the middle there. Cambridge offered to purchase the property for $22 million. And their intent was to relocate their current school and expand. They envision having a pre-kindergarten through 12th grade campus, and they hope to have 550 to 600 students on that campus, and they anticipate reaching that capacity in 8 to 10 years. Brookfield Residential offered to purchase the property for $47 million. Their design, and again, you know, this is very conceptual at this point. Their design was for a between 135 and 220 for sale single family detached homes. A portion of the development they envision being 3,000 or average 3,000 square foot homes on 5,000 square foot lots. And then the balance being slightly smaller homes, about 2,400 square foot on smaller lots built in small clusters of 6 homes. They also expected that the city would require 10 to 20% of the number of market rate houses that they would have to build, 10 to 20% of that number as affordable housing. And, you know, they would work with the city to determine, was that going to be rental or for sale housing? The third purchase offer was from Costco. Costco offered $40.3 million to purchase the property. And their design, it was as stated here, and it's the same in their lease proposal. They're proposing to develop the property with one of their Costco warehouses, a gas station, and then part of the property with an urban village, which would have retail shops, restaurants, and a residential component. The residential component, again, they would need to work on that with the city, but they had a couple of, their proposals actually ranged from about 44 units up to 120 residential units. Their alternate proposal was to ground lease the property from the district, and that they were offering a triple net lease, the initial term to be 40 years with 2 additional 10-year renewal options. The annual lease amount was going to be increased by 15% every year, every 10 years. And the initial lease amount was to be $2,114,690 per year. That dollar amount at a 4.5% cap rate meant they were valuing the property at about the $47 million range on a ground lease. As I said, their proposed project under the ground lease or under the for sale scenario were identical. With that, we can go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Andreas.
Very good, thank you. So yes, a comparison of the proposals you just heard and what makes it most beneficial. I think a lot of people have inquiry about that and want to know particularly why one is better than the other. The Costco proposal, as you just heard, was for a fair amount of money, to be certain. The 40-year term would net the district $105.6 million. And if you go out the 60-year term, which is 40 plus 2 10-year extensions, it's $185.1 million. It's around a $47 million asset, as you heard, with a 4.5% capitalization rate. And so it would be ongoing revenue coming into the district, starting at that $2.114 and change million, going up every 10 years by 15%. And like I said, you hear the overall amount at the 40-year mark and the 60-year mark. One real great thing about this, obviously, is that the district retains ownership of the property. So 40 or 60 years out, we'll still own the property. And that's a huge benefit. And it has unrestricted income coming in rather than restricted like we talked about with sale. And I'll get to that again in a minute. Finally, And I think the feather in the cap on the Costco proposal that really puts it over the edge is Costco in this transaction would be responsible for all the entitlement and zoning and approval costs associated with development of this property. You'll hear more momentarily about Prop A from Dr. Blade when we get there, but we've talked about this at 3 different board meetings at least that I recall. And it will be a pretty onerous burden on Costco to get through a process. It feels confident that it could, but it's certainly going to cost time and money and resources to drive that train, and they're willing to spend that fund and take that risk. The Brookfield residential proposal that you heard was the highest for sale or purchase transaction price at $47 million. Again, similar to what we're hearing in the Costco asset, if you will. And it was somewhat undefined and nebulous. So we know Brookfield from other transactions and deals, and certainly a quality residential builder. We talked to them about this, and the confusing part in all of this, if you bear with me, is that Prop A, which is a requirement that a vote of the people approve a zone change. I'll leave it at that for now. While taking time and costing money, we did not believe it was applicable to this property at the time we sent out the RFP. In fact, the city confirmed that it was not applicable. We sent out the RFP. RFPs were received assuming that that was the case. Later, we confirmed that it was applicable and it was going to cost developers more. Brookfield made very clear that their $47 million price couldn't necessarily stand, knowing that it had more approval processes and dollars to play through. So 47 really isn't a magic number for Brookfield. Cambridge wouldn't have had to gone through a proposal process, but at 22 million, it really is apples and oranges. So back to the Brookfield real quick. Again, somewhat nebulous, wouldn't have been 47 million when we got there. Even if we got to some magic number that the board would be okay with, be it 40, 42, whatever that might be, million, those proceeds would be restricted to capital improvement and maintenance that would not reoccur within a 5-year period. Cambridge was 22 million for a sale outright. Again, that would have been restricted income. It would have been a quick timeline. It would have been more like a 90-day transaction, good, done, simple. But the district would have left far more than half on the table, and it would have been restricted proceeds. Cambridge had a caveat to their proposal where they said they would give $8 million plus one of the properties that they own, the property that they own, I should say. And yet that isn't something that necessarily compares to a Costco ground lease net revenue. If somebody had come forward and wanted to exchange, for example, apartment complex or a commercial building that was generating 2.114690 million all and each and every year, the district would have looked at that as very, very similar to the Costco transaction in an exchange. If they said, we've got this complex and it's going to give you $2.1 million and all we need to do is swap properties, great. I'll tell you, however, that in order to receive a property like that, what we would be exchanging for wouldn't be this land. It would be more than vacant land. It would have to be land that had all the approvals done, because that's where you see your value. The land value without entitlements would not be anywhere near the $47 million mark. So that and more goes into a comparison of the proposals. And frankly, there is a chilling effect on who might be interested in this property because of Prop A and all of that wherewithal that a developer would have to go through in order to get it developed, which is, you know, information that you should know certainly, and you're going to hear plenty more about. If the district proceeds with this transaction, you're going to hear from Costco about all the specifics, and we'll talk a little bit more about next steps in just a moment. Moving forward.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
So then let's go to what does happen next. Will the community have a voice? Will any proposed projects go to a vote?
Shall I start on this, Andreas?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if the district, you know, and it's an if the district and Costco reach agreement on a ground lease, then Costco will begin working with its consultants and with the city to create a development plan for the site. Right now, really all they have is concept. That plan will be presented to the community for input and review. The development plan itself will have to comply with CEQA. It'll have an environmental impact report will have to be prepared, and all of the studies that go into an EIR will have to be prepared and submitted to the city. Any plan for the property. We'll go through the planning department, then to the planning commission for planning commission hearing, at least one hearing. Then it will go to the city council for a public hearing, at least one hearing. Frequently on developments of this size, you'll have 2 hearing process in planning and 2 hearings at the city council. Finally, if the city council, if the project goes there and the city council approves it, the property is, as Andrea said, subject to Proposition A, and it will have to go on a ballot measure for a vote of the entire city of San Diego. The process probably will take 3 to 4 years to get to a ballot measure if you get approval through planning and city council. So, and it's an extremely lengthy process. Entitlement process in any city is lengthy, but when you have a city the size of San Diego and you've had as much interest in phase shifting and zoning changes, the process will be slow and thorough.
Very good. Thank you. I think, Barry, that says it all very well. The only thing I would add to that was just simply that's information that we have been providing to the board throughout the process, the fall of 2019, even as recently as September and October, September, I guess, August and September of this year. In talking with the board, we've made clear that this is going to take some time, certainly, but specifically that everybody out there who has a stake in this and is interested in this will have the opportunity to be heard. The public comment is formalized through the California Environmental Quality Act and the Planning Commission and City Council processes. So there's multiple bites at that apple to be heard, to massage a project. And so I say all of that because where I was at the last board meeting, I think we had heard from a number of different emailed questions, and we got through quite a few of those early, read into the record. And so many of those go to the specifics about a project, traffic, and some of what you heard from one of the speakers, participants tonight. Those are the kinds of things that it's appropriate for Costco to address, for them to provide information. I know they're interested in talking with the Homeowners Association. They will have very soon live a website to provide information, or this doesn't go forward. If it's going forward, that will all have to occur, and they're going to have to do their community outreach. So there's certainly plenty of opportunity. This is just saying, so far anyway, that the board would be interested in seeing if a project like that had legs, and if it did, what it would receive by way of value and rent many years from now. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. So we're up on our time. This was originally scheduled to go to 7, but I know that we still have, you know, a lot of attendees wanting to ask some questions. So I'm going to ask the panelists, are you able to stay on a little longer to field some questions for our community? I'm seeing nods. Okay, so we'll take some questions and we'll try to get in as many as we can. If we don't get to yours tonight, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to this recording, as well as a form where we can gather more questions and create an FAQ or an answer for you. So we will open it up to questions if you want to all raise your hands. And these can be related to any topic that we did or did not address during the presentation. Thank you. Okay, I see hands going up. All right, so we, sorry, they're all moving. Jamie Peller, go ahead with your question, Jamie.
Hi, yeah, I saw on the one slide where Andrea said something about the 2019 public hearing. I never knew about that, and I've asked other people. I don't know, I've never heard anything about that. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the advisory committee meets as a legislative extension, or an extension, I should say, of the legislative body, which is here, the school district governing board. So they have to follow all Brown Act requirements, just like a school board would. So they're public hearings, public meetings, I should say. And then the hearing portion of it is prior to them taking action to declare something surplus, they have what's called a priority use list, where they basically say what might there be by way of priorities of use: lease, sale, sometimes exchange. And that's par for the course. And all that occurs. And then the SBE, which is State Board of Ed, that is, has the California Department of Ed check into all of that, receive all that information, and then make a recommendation as to whether or not a waiver would be appropriate. And they in fact did that. And we received that in November of 2019.
Next is Mandy Pagan or Pagan. Go ahead, Mandy.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, I guess I'm a little bit in the same vein as the previous question, which was, so I live in Santa Luz. We live right next to this property, and no one in our community knew anything about this. When we did an addition recently on our house, and we had to let everyone around us know that we were planning on doing this, so they had the opportunity to give input. I feel like that's kind of a similar situation to this, that you were going to do something pretty significant right next to our neighborhood, yet you gave no notice. I mean, as a parent, and I have 5 children, I would not have even known to have gone to this meeting, listened to this meeting, because you didn't give us any notice. So what I would like to know is, when did you first hold discussions with Costco about this? Was it not until after this November 2019? And when did you make it public that there were RFPs going out, so that people in the neighborhood maybe could have given some input into that process, or brainstormed, or had some ideas? I guess just why have you never talked to the neighborhood? Why have you guys are the school board, you're not realtors. That's not what your mission statement is. What your mission statement is to educate our children. So I don't understand like why we're even going down this road. I understand you need money, but you have to understand that you've really left the community out of this whole process. And that's what everyone is really upset about. So if you want me to recap what my specific questions are, they're fine. Or if you understood enough, like to address them, we can go from there.
I think we got him, Mandy. Thank you. Andreas, you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can certainly take a stab at that for the benefit of all. I think, and I appreciate the question, the school district and all school districts have a set of rules to follow, education code and government code provisions to follow. And it needs to get through a number of things. What's difficult is projecting what might occur, what might happen, especially when the district like this, Poway Unified, was trying to see what was out there, knowing that Prop A may or may not apply, at one point thinking it didn't, then thinking it did. What development entity out there might be interested? Would it be residential? Could this maybe be an exchange like we talked about before? When the advisory committee met and meets, those look to demographics, need. Do we need this property, or is it truly surplus? And what might occur with that property? The district took that ball and rolled with it to say, like it did in 2012, let's seek a waiver and see what comes of it. Back in 2014 and 2016, nothing had occurred. And it's difficult to go out to any community and have a conversation about anything with any real specificity, as you can imagine. Had we said this could be a development of 240 homes or townhomes or apartment complexes with multifamily residential, all sorts of questions would have arisen. If we talked about this being a big box, again, all sorts of questions would have been flowing in. And it could have been that it was just going to be raw sell, just land sold outright, or an exchange where it could have remained as such for a long while in exchange for property that we were to receive. Again, it goes back to pure economics and other considerations when it comes to something, whether or not it's most beneficial. How can you use the proceeds and the like? So what I'm getting at is this is extremely early on in the process. We all just had the World Series, right? This is like out number 1 in a World Series. And I hate to use sports analogies. I'm not necessarily a huge fan, but that said, you get the point. And this is early on. And what this suggests is now that we can identify a potential use that would benefit the district in a way that it would be willing to give up its property for that amount of resources coming into the district. It now takes on a life of its own, and you can hear more about what that use would be like. And the community is involved, and there's outreach from a HOA level to websites of a developer and more. And there's the processes we talked about a moment ago at the Planning Commission, City Council, and even before that, the Proposition A ballot measure. So way more to come, and the community is engaged at that point rather than it being premature and us guessing, could there have been a Costco or otherwise. And the last question I heard, if I might, I know it's a lot, is what were those discussions and where was it headed? I think Costco over the years had been interested in the property. I think they'd been talking about very different situations or numbers, buying it outright. I don't recall a ground lease, but they might have offered that in the past. I don't recall. But I know that with this, the RFP went out, they engaged after. So any discussions I had with Costco came in after the RFP. We looked at that, clarified that Prop A does in fact apply, and worked through all of that during a pandemic, no less, and got it to the board as quickly as we could. So
yeah, let me,
goes into that.
Andreas, let me reiterate that point because I think it's an important point. So in the 3.5 years that I've been with the district, I've had a couple conversations with Costco about their interest in that property. But to Andreas's point, once we issued the RFP, then it's a public call for proposals, and all communication with Costco stops. So they're like any other developer or proposer who wants to offer us something, and we don't have, and it's right that we don't have conversations with them after the RFP was made public and approved by the board. And just a general reminder is, again, this is staff and our team here this evening talking about process and the work we've done to get to this point. This is not the Board of Education on this panel, nor are we speaking necessarily for the Board of Education.
Thanks for clarifying, Ron. The next question is from Layla DeJoy. Layla, you're up. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. After 15 years of paying for taxes, I get a couple of minutes, so I really appreciate that. I wanted to touch on PW's question because earlier a couple of panelists didn't really understand what she was talking about. So I just wanted to paint a picture of our situation. We bought a place in Santa Luz 15 years ago, and without having a child or anything, we really didn't, enjoy the benefits of schools because we were living in San Francisco. So once our daughter was born, we came to back to Santa Luz. The house was sitting empty for years, but we thought the school district is like so good, so why not move back? So we moved back because it was a quiet, clean, safe environment, and we were really excited to raise my daughter here. Now I'm just really heartbroken and feel like I'm a jilted woman because, all these years we've been paying for taxes, and our home is part of our livelihoods, but I don't know if you guys even took consideration of how having a gas station in our backyard is going to hurt our livelihood. It's going to hurt our children. Yes, it's nice to make these decisions and treat children like they're numbers and moving the data around and throw statistics in our faces, but I don't want my daughter to go be in a trailer and have her fellow classmates who have so many allergies these days to be in some danky place to, in the middle of winter or summer to try to concentrate on the education. I was promised a property that's going to be built out for the future generation, and that's what I expect. My teacher, my daughter's teacher right now, she's balancing 3 classrooms without any help within the district, while someone there is making $300,000 a year. So I don't understand how I'm being represented, and I'm just really frustrated and heartbroken because I just don't feel represented. And I'm so sorry. I'm so flustered right now.
Wait, are you on mute? Oh.
Can we comment? Well, I just want to say, just to clarify, I know that we've heard a lot that the people in the community feel they were promised a school. It's important to understand that the school district never promised a school. part of the mitigation for the development is that they provided, well, not provided, but they offered sites that we were considered potential. We purchased those sites. There wasn't a need for the middle school. Your taxes are being collected to pay for the schools that you have been provided. That's what the Mello-Roos Act asks us to do, to use your taxes to provide you seats. It doesn't say we have to build brand new schools for every single CFD. It says we do have to build seats and provide seats for you. And we did that with Willow Grove. We did that with Oak Valley, because some of your community goes to Oak Valley. We did that by expanding Black Mountain because there was adequate space to accommodate that. And those are brand new classrooms at Black Mountain. We did that with Del Norte. We did that at a couple other schools before your schools were built. We did it with Mount Carmel, and we did it at Del Norte. If we go back to look at all the facilities that Ron talked about, that was about $370 million worth of facilities that were built for that community. Not all of that was supported by your CFD taxes. A portion of it was supported by your CFD taxes. So if you think about $37 million worth of facilities that had the school district and all the CFDs have provided for the community, and the communities have contributed approximately $19 to $20 million to that total, we've definitely provided what we were supposed to provide based on the need in that area. While understanding the frustration, I just want to make sure that you understand that we do take that into consideration when we make the decisions. We want to make sure that the money is being used the way it's supposed to. In your area, we collect about $1.7 million annually to go toward debt service, and the debt service is about $1.2 million. So your taxes are going directly to debt service. It's not sitting somewhere waiting to be built. There isn't enough extra to build anything, and we have met our obligation to provide you the seats. If more seats are needed at other schools, like our facility master plan talks about, if we have a small fluctuation that we see that isn't long-standing, we will provide portables. We don't look at portables as a bad option. There was a time when the state of California required every school be built with 25% of that capacity in portables. So it's a good option to have. It's something that we can use for a fluctuating need, because if at some point you don't need them anymore, it's a lot easier to remove portables than to have a school that was built to accommodate 1,200 students that now has 600. So it's a financial aspect that the district has to look at as well. And we value every classroom that our students are in.
Thank you, Rhea. The next question is from Scott's Galaxy S9. Scott, go ahead.
Okay, so I appreciate, and I've heard that the district is short of money, needs money. I heard that they looked at the bids. On the face of it, the Costco bid looks like the best bid. Leaving that to one side, what about the community interest? Do you have any obligation to think about the community interest in those various bids? You had 3 bids. You had a school, you had housing, you had Costco. Costco seems to be the least sympathetic to the neighborhood. What was your obligation to think about those bids in terms of the effect on the community?
I'll make 2 comments. One, and then maybe Andreas wants to chime in as well. But with respect, so remember the 3 options for our particular needs at Poway Unified. Other than the exchange option, which sort of needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, the outright purchase options were not really viable options for the reasons that we stated earlier. So by selling the property outright, we would not generate an ongoing income stream for the district that we could use for our general fund, for our educational programs, and for our operating budget that the district has. With respect to the community interest, again, that's all of those opportunities are yet to come. So, as we talk about community impact, that'll be the work that Costco does if the board approves entering into an agreement with them with respect to defining those parameters around what the development looks like and the potential impacts of that development on the community and on the neighborhood.
Ron, if I might just add to that, and you're 100% right on what you just said, and I do appreciate the question. It is true that a decision to move forward with this ground lease or the development of the property in any particular way would affect those nearest to it. That makes perfect sense. The board and any school board could certainly just go through a traditional method where it offers the property, for example, for sale or lease, either way, and take the highest bid that comes in. The problem with that is when you receive that highest bid, and let's just say it's a $47 million purchase, or the value of a $47 million asset with 2.1 million coming in on the first year and it going up after that, et cetera, and it chooses that, that's the end of the discussion. You now have an agreement, an arrangement. There is no other obligation to look at anything. Frankly, the board took upon itself, put itself in the crosshairs, if you will, a little bit more if this particular process by going through an RFP that says, you know what, we can consider all of what we receive and see which one is the quote most beneficial. So in that analysis, there could certainly, and there was an element of community interest, an element of comparison between A, B, and C, because there were very different offers. And there wasn't a whole ton to choose from, frankly. It's not like we received 25. Because of Prop A and that chilling effect, we received 3. And the developers out there that we've spoken to over the last many, many months made very clear that they're aware of how burdensome that Prop A component is. So long story short on that, it is not an obligation per se, but it certainly was an element, a voluntary element that the board added in to consider the most beneficial analysis rather than just going with a high bidder. And on the last point, with a high bidder scenario, somebody could have come in and literally said, I will give you $60 million for your property that I want to purchase. And I'm going to put 3 very large multifamily residential buildings on there, or something that maybe the city would never even entertain. And we would have been caught up in escrow for a long period of time for it not to conclude. And that's not beneficial to anyone. My point in all of that is, regardless of the methodology or how we got to here, if it's RFP, if it's traditional bid or otherwise, I think we've pointed out how this RFP is of a benefit. But more than that, you draw a line once we pick a particular development and everything starts fresh, if you will, where the developer, as you've heard many times, needs to then show what the project is, hear from the community, address issues related to traffic, noise, what have you, all of the above. So it's not incumbent upon us to, I think, pick and choose, if you will, between traditional bid or RFP or what obligations there were. There was more added to this than needed to be, and it was thoughtful. So I just wanted to at least put that out there, because I got the impression at the last couple of meetings, perhaps, that that there's a sentiment that there wasn't a lot of thought given to this, and I appreciate why that sentiment is there, but there's obviously more to the story. So.
Next question we have is from Steph Green. Go ahead, Steph. You there, Steph? Next question is from Lucy Beard. Lucy, go ahead.
Right, just checking you can hear me okay? Wonderful.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So Andreas and Barry, really helpful for you guys to walk us through that process. I've just got to push back and say the California waiver was very explicit, that it was equally about financial benefit to PUSD as much as it was for community interest. What I'm hearing consistently from you is you're saying Costco is going to deal with it. Zane, the board member himself, said in the September 10th meeting, Costco will deal with the community. And I hear you all as employees stating that same thing. You'll hear the kids in the background. So again, I reiterate back to the point of the California waiver and the Brown Acts, that you can't say after we do the RFP is when we take community involvement. It was explicitly part of the process. And you're hearing explicitly how the community is vehemently against putting a Costco there. So with that, I need to back to you to say, why are you saying Costco will be community interest and not PUSD, which is their explicit statement in the waiver?
I can take this as it relates, I guess, to the waiver. I think we've touched on this. I feel like we've explained the process and explained the obligation, if you will, or the lack thereof, but the components that go into choosing most beneficial and why that occurred. The waiver process has been followed. The notion is we receive proposals. We had to clarify proposals. There was, like in all situations, when you receive a 1 or 2 page document, you want to know what you're reading and what you're really bringing to the board. And then you bring them to the board, and then within 60 days of bringing them to the board, you seek approval of the most beneficial, which is exactly what occurred here. We took some time to clarify during the pandemic and during the Prop A discussions. I think developers, all of them, those that proposed and those that didn't propose, were talking about Prop A applying. And so we got with the city and we had that discussion and confirmed that, yes, in fact, it did. And then we continue to clarify what we were seeing by way of proposals and who would stick, if you will, who would be interested in this property moving forward. The district is not trying to push responsibility on what this project might be to the developer. We're naturally saying the developer will explain what this project may be. They run that business. We aren't the ones saying that this has to be X amount of residential units and X amount of acreage for the Costco and the like. That is, like we said, the reason for a very long multiple year process that they'll go through. So the waiver was followed to the letter, and the most beneficial analysis that we've explained is accurate and has been done throughout the state for many, many, many years.
Next question is from Sunbir Gujral. Sunbir, you're up.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around why Costco would commit to spending $40+ million as a business and have all these open questions where earlier it was stated that even a multifamily dwelling would not get approved or would have a hard time getting approved, but a gas station somehow will, unless Costco felt that they had some sort of an inside track to getting this approval in place. So my question really goes back to a question or a statement that a previous caller made, that there are 3 Costcos in the Poway Unified School District that have sort of probably gone through the same process. So I just wanted to get a little better understanding of how that happened, and why is it that Costco feels that they have some sort of a special status or relationship with the Poway School District that they can do things like this?
I can address that too, Ron, if you want me to start. I don't necessarily feel that, in fact, I don't feel that Costco feels that it had an inside track or a special relationship whatsoever. In fact, I think they were interested in this property for some period of time and didn't necessarily think the district would be interested in having a dialogue or negotiation with them regarding this particular property. There were questions regarding what it would take to get it developed, the property developed, that is. And I wanted to clarify, when I made mention before of, could it be multiple buildings that are multifamily? I don't know if that's something the city would allow or not. I was saying, hypothetically speaking, when you get a bid and it's X, Y, and Z and a big number coming in and you choose that, that's not necessarily something that could get through the city. What we did, and what any prudent seller side or less or side, is to make sure that when we're looking at a proposal that we have at least enough safeguard or enough time and dollars built in that it makes sense to proceed. Right now, this district remains vacant and it's not going to change anytime soon. So it's appropriate, given the wherewithal that it's going to take to get this property developed, to give some time to any developer, assuming that they're spending those dollars themselves and not the district spending those dollars, to proceed with trying to appease and satisfy all of the questions, including yours, sir. That question is a good question to put to Costco to say, why do you feel comfortable that ultimately you will receive approval? That's for them to determine. We have not sat in on conversations between them and the city. I don't know any conversations they might have had with the city other than the clarification regarding Prop A and the fact that there would be a ballot measure. So all the rest of that, there certainly has not been a conversation ongoing or a special relationship. That just is truly not the case whatsoever.
Next question is Sandy Lamb. Sandy, go ahead.
Hi there, thank you. Okay, gosh, a lot of information today has been repeated over and over, and much of it I don't agree with, in that It seems that, Andreas, you already are committed to moving forward with Costco. To hear those words most beneficial from your mouth just gives me nightmares of the board meeting where I saw the back of your head and you were telling the school board what was the most beneficial in such a selfish manner. What's most beneficial for the school board, but not what's most beneficial for the community. Poway Unified has a fabulous reputation. Why? They have high test scores. Why? Because of the community that supports this district, the community that runs the foundations, that runs the PTAs, that's in the classroom supporting the teachers, that gets these high test scores, and then therefore the district grows and the salaries are quite handsome in the district. All of those things are in partnership with the community. This process here has no partnership with the community. The community outreach should be occurring prior to an agreement with Costco, and having it all be brushed off to Costco is too late. The school board or the school district should be reaching out to the community ahead of time. We are partners. We're partners in the community as far as educating our kids and developing a strong school district. So that is my commentary. My question is, I have three, and one is very quick. Rhea, you mentioned that you purchased this property. It was my understanding that it was a mitigating factor in order to develop, and so that it was land that was gifted to the district. So I want clarification there. Number two, I'd like to know who made the decision that the public would indeed be excluded from this RFP process, the scope description, if you will. Explain the reasoning why the district decided to exclude the public from this. Because you're saying that, oh, it was discussed at this meeting and discussed at that meeting. You know, when you guys want our help, you really can reach out to us and you can get our help. When you don't want us to know about this RFP process, you somehow are quiet. Now, another thing I'd like to say is I have done a lot of research, and someone on the panel this evening explained to me that Costco, yes, has been looking at this property for a while, and that they were notified that the RFP process was moving forward. So I believe that there has been a relationship. I'd like that discussed a bit. And my last question is, where is Dr. Phelps tonight?
Okay, well, I guess I'll go first since your question was to me first. Although this land was, these parcels were mitigated, we still had to purchase them. So those agreements were included, they're included with the formation documents. And so we did purchase those sites the same way we purchased the site for Willow Grove, and we purchased the sites for the other schools and the other CFDs.
I can take the second one, perhaps. Who made the decision to exclude the community? There was no such decision to exclude the community. We follow, again, a surplus property process that deals with an advisory committee. We then go to public meetings. I rattled off which those meetings were. Certainly wasn't trying to be selfish in any manner in the way I presented anything to the board with regard to most beneficial. We only use those words because the waiver office used those words. They want to have the district decide which one is most beneficial. So we use that terminology so that the waiver office knows we went through the process they've asked us to go through. I go back to, again, the notion that if Costco had come forward on a traditional bid scenario and said, here's our offer for a ground lease, and then we had other entities that came in and said, here's our offer to purchase, the school board could have certainly went forward with the ground lease option. End of discussion. There is no communication. We wouldn't even have known until that very day that they were in the room making an offer. So there's certainly no overt effort to exclude anybody.
I can take the prior contact with Costco question. When we spoke last Thursday, Sandy, you asked me if there was a relationship between the district and Costco. And I told you that the district had received a letter from Costco. I don't remember the date. I think it was 2016 or 2017, something like that. It was actually from a land broker representing Costco. And in that, They had made an offer to the district. The district had informed them, no, they were not interested. But they requested that if the district did make a determination that they might want to dispose of the property, that they wanted to be notified. That's the reason an RFP was sent to Costco.
And by the way, on that notification, it goes out to anybody really who has expressed any interest, but beyond that, to developers who over the years have said, hey, I'm interested in properties that districts might be interested in disposing of potentially or developing, and goes out to local brokerage community where people have come in and said, I'm a broker in the area and I would like to be notified. And so there's probably a couple hundred or so recipients of that alone, let alone publications and whatnot. So them receiving something is par for the course.
I can address the last question about where Dr. Phelps is. She's online listening tonight, but we did not invite her as a panelist because she's not a subject matter expert, but she is attending the meeting. At this time, I do see that there are still about 30 people waiting to ask their questions, but we're gonna call it a night, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear your questions and answer them for you. So following this meeting, I will send a follow-up email to all of you who RSVP'd, and we will share this meeting as a recording, as well as an opportunity for you to submit the questions that you did not feel were answered tonight. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, as well as our panelists, and I just wanted to wish you a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right.
Night.
Bye.